The town council doesn't meet.
This is the Vero Beach Utilities Commission meeting on Tuesday, April 22nd. The first item on our agenda is the approval of minutes, and we have quite a few to do. And I think, Sherry, do we need to do them one at a time, or can we take...
You can do them all at once or one at a time, however you want.
All right. Why don't we I'll make a motion that we approve all of them, and then in discussion, if there's anything that needs to change, we can maybe modify that.
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, that's good. That's that much paper done. Public comments. Do we have any comments from the public this morning? Seeing none, public comments are closed. New business. Tom?
Faster than I thought. I've never been to a meeting where we didn't have a lot of public comment. I'm Tom Richards, Director of Electric System, and I'm here today to try to respond to a question Mr. Woodall brought up at the last meeting regarding the demand charge that shows up on the invoice, and I made a copy of that and put it in the presentation just to all kind of dealing from the same page here. This is the February OUC invoice, and the top line there is a so-called demand charge for 93 megawatts and over $1 million. And the question was, why is that so high? Why are we paying that? And so on. So I thought that would be a good lead-in for a kind of a background on why we have capacity requirements and where we get our capacity resources and how we pay for them. So this is just a reproduction of the top part of the OUC invoice. There's actually several more line items, most of which are pretty small. So you can see not only do we buy energy and capacity from OUC, we buy a lot of other services too, so they do provide, it's kind of a wraparound contract in a lot of ways. So I'll just remind you again, this is a 20-year contract that was signed by the council back in April of 2008. It became effective on January 1st, 2010. So you've got about 15 years plus to run on this contract yet. And I've only been here less than 2 years, so I wasn't here when it signed. So when you start asking me, why did we do that, you're going to have to kind of read between the lines, because I'm not sure I could answer the question. I know you're going to ask those questions. Why did we do that? So this is certainly the major part of the bill is right there in those first two lines. There's a lot of other adjustments, ups and downs, and typically some of those costs are estimated at the top line, and they come back the next month and they true them up to the actual. So sometimes we'll see an adjustment right at the bottom. It's a little bit plus, a little bit minus based on their adjustments. But this is pretty much what they cost us.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
on that page? On the energy charge, is that purely fuel, or does it include anything besides fuel?
The question is the energy charge strictly fuel? I would say I'm not sure that it's all energy, but it's mostly energy. That supposedly reflects the same Public Service Commission regulated energy charge that they provide for the retail customers. So it would be primarily energy. There might be some purchase power in there. It might be net of their sales of power.
So that charge, monthly charge, will move around depending in part on underlying fuel prices such as natural gas prices.
Yes, correct. And consistent. It's been pretty consistent over the last 24 months or so. It's been right in around the $39 to $42 range. The one you're looking at right there is $43.
Does the OUC hedge its gas prices?
I cannot answer that question. I don't know.
Thank you.
You said it was consistent. How did you measure that consistency?
I was looking back over the last couple of years of energy charges on the OUC invoices, and they've run $39 to $43 right in there. It's typically right in that range. It's pretty consistent.
You need to turn your microphones on. Can't hear anything.
That's
You're fine.
okay. One of the services that OUC does for us is they prepare a load forecast, 20-year load forecast for us that we use, and it's a monthly forecast. This chart here shows the demand part of it. They also forecast the energy. They do it by customer class, That's residential, commercial, industrial, street lighting. And they do it by month, and it's a kind of an econometric model they put together. It's pretty sophisticated. Something that we don't have the ability to do here. We're glad to have that done.
There seems to be modest load growth from 2014 forward, but there's in terms of the peak, a pretty good jump from 2013 to 2014.
Yes. All 2013 on this sheet was, let's see, this forecast was done in January 2013. They may have already had the January loads.
Yeah, and also, Vero Beach isn't growing, so why is this keeping on going up?
Well, actually, it is growing. Our load's growing. You can discuss what you want about population and whatever, but actually our loads are going up. And it's not very much. We're looking at about less than 2% growth here a year. It's pretty small.
But the growth from 2013 to I would expect you to have a 1.5% growth, but the
There's
growth
probably you'd have to go back. I didn't do this forecast, so I'm not sure what the numbers are in here. But I suspect that what happened is in 2013 they had a lower load than was expected based on weather, and what they've done is they weather normalized all these forecast figures. So your actuals going back might reflect other events that might be weather related, and they would come back and normalize that. We had a reduction in the last couple of years. Our loads have dropped. So we're starting to see some increase since last summer. Our loads have been coming up a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. But we were in kind of a tailspin for over a year. When you compare the loads to the year before, every time you look at a month, it was less for a long time. So we're starting to come back, and it seems to be partly reflective things that go on with your loads. The weather, pretty hard to control, but we are very weather dependent. The economy has something to do with it. And my opinion is, because our rates are pretty high, there's some time-delayed price elasticity in people's response to the high prices. They have come back and have conserved a little bit. So you see more people, and even nationally with their standards, more people using energy-efficient lighting. As they replace your air conditioning units in your businesses and your homes, those are going in with more efficient units. So we're gradually seeing a reduction oftentimes in use for the same kind of usage. But we are seeing some growth. And it's both not so much in numbers of customers, it's actually growth in use per customer.
Is that maximum load, or is that?
This chart shows the maximum each month.
Okay, now, what I'd like to know is, because we've done this before, if we could lower that maximum, go to our ratepayers and say, if you do this, we can lower our maximum. Would that help you?
Only a little bit. Only a small amount. Would it help us?
Say we could lower 5 megawatts.
It would depend on whether you lost energy sales or not at the same time. If we could get people to use the same amount of energy and lower their demand, that would help us.
That's what I mean. Lower when we know there's a peak demand, and we know when the peak demands are coming. If we could lower that, would that help you? Because I've been told that it all depends on the formula. Whatever that means.
In the short run, it won't help you much. In the longer run, for these kinds of forecasts, if you could begin to forecast lower loads, then you'd have to have smaller amounts of resources to cover them going forward. You would begin to plan for lower demands.
Apparently, it would have to be always in January. That's when your peak load.
That's the forecast, but your typical winter peak will come anywhere from December 1st to February, into February. They just, when they forecast them in January. But
okay, well, I'll talk to you about that later.
The reason I put this up here is because I picked out the number 173, which is pretty hard to see in this thing. I made it green, but you can't see it. First month, this is a 12-month forecast, first month of January. Our contract with OUC is a calendar year contract. So back in January of 2013, better than a year ago, they forecasted 173 megawatt peak for Vero in 2014, calendar 2014, and it was a January peak, or still a winter peaking utility. And that carries across to where you show the column for winter peak and summer peak and annual peak. So we picked out that number, 173, and that enters into our calculation of a demand charge from OUC based on the contract. this is how we serve our load. We are a generating utility. We're responsible for having generating capacity to serve all of our load, and it's a reserve requirement of 15%.
Is that reserve requirement state mandated or?
No, it's national. It's required by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission through the National, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which is the electric reliability organization designated by the federal government to force utilities to be reliable.
I think it's not mandatory. I think utilities can operate at less of a reserve margin if they can demonstrate that they can effectively operate that way. And that gets to Herb's question, which is there are companies that can come in and help utilities shave the peak, which postpones building or buying more peaking capacity. That's why I asked the question about the 15%, whether that's state mandated.
Well, it's not a state mandate, it's a federal mandate. And we can, as long as we're responsible for our own generation capacity, we have to have a 15% reserve requirement in order to be interconnected with other utilities, because they also have the same requirement. So everyone it's kind of like playing poker. You got to ante up based on your size, then you can play the game. And what happens is the utilities actually lean on each other for reserves if you have to have an emergency. But in order to get in the game, you got to bring 15% extra beyond your forecasted load.
Bill, just for discussion purposes, assuming that there were ways to alter the demand, what do you think that might be? I mean, you were surprised that it took this increase from 2013 to 14, levels off thereafter due to a variety of factors. But, I mean, what kind of relief realistically what might you be looking at here? I'm a little suspicious that first of all, you can really change the public's use patterns dramatically. I think they're going to do what they want to do to try to operate their utility as economically as they can. But some of these other factors that you're familiar with and I'm not, I mean, are they going to have what would be the impact? Or what could it be?
When I was employed, and I do like retirement, you could find ways to shave the peak in any number of ways. One was if you had an industrial base, you could essentially agree to curtail that customer if the cost of buying the peaking to continue to serve that load was in excess of what you and the customer could agree on as a private contract solution. So you might shave 30 megawatts off a large load. There are companies that come in and help utilities shave the residential peak by essentially installing thermostats and controlling those thermostats so that instead of having the thermostat run between 4 in the afternoon and 9 in the afternoon at 70 degrees, it runs at 79 degrees. And the utility provides a rebate to the customers who agree to do that. And so I think if you Google it, I think you can find companies that have shaved the peak, anywhere from 5 to 8%. The benefit of that for a large utility would be to defer building peaking capacity, and state regulators usually like deferring things like that. But in our particular case, you'd have to have the OUC as the provider agree to try to make those reductions for itself and for all its customers, including ourselves. And I'm not aware of how complicated that might be in the state of Florida.
Thank you.
That's the main reason FP&L is putting in the. I think it's on. Oh no, it's not. That's the main reason FP&L is putting on the smart meters, and they had all that fuss about that, so that they can regulate loads, keep their peak down.
Tom, you were going back to the load forecast demand. Do you know how often this is revised
Once a year.
Once a year.
It's done right at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
Just give you. There you go.
And are they? It looks to me like probably January of 2013 was actual in this chart here. I mean, that
may
big
have
jump.
been. That the forecast would have been done in that time frame. They may have had the actual loads.
Because that seems as Herb, I believe it was mentioned earlier, that's a big jump. No, Bill mentioned it, but because that seems to be key if their estimates are not being tracked by historical savings.
Well, then the issue, of course, with winter peaks is we haven't really had a winter for about 5 years. If you recall back on, we haven't had a really good cold spell for several years. So we have to be prepared for it, but it doesn't happen every year. The summer peaks we get pretty consistently. I mean, it's pretty much the same load day after day, and we get those much more.
So we have to pay for it every year.
Well, that's part of the game you play. You know, it's an average too. I mean, you could have a higher peak than these numbers. This is just a kind of a middle of the road forecast. Let me just.
The problem is we got to pay for it all year.
Got to pay for it
every month.
All year, right.
Even though we only use it one day for 15 minutes.
We
pay for it all year.
That's exactly right. Let's look at this capacity calculation, because this is kind of a snapshot of our capacity resource stack that we use to serve our load. We are required to serve our load, so what's our load? It's 173. We have to have another 15% in reserve to be able to serve if something should happen. So that's our total requirements for calendar 2014. And let's look at our resource stack. We have our FMPA St. Lucie stack, it's 13.5 megawatts. Used to be 11, now it's 13.5. They upgraded that plant. Stanton 1 and 2 added together are about 38. We don't have any contract rated delivery from FMPA. This was put in the agreement because at the time the agreement was made, they weren't sure what there was going to be a CROD or not. But anyway, it's 0. And we are also using our combined cycle units 2 and 5 for capacity. And this leads to the question, why don't we use the rest of our plant's capacity? I think, this is reading between the lines, because I'm not sure why this was decided to go this way, but I think that the thought process was that the rest of the units in the plant are not reliable enough to call on every day to operate. They're there, we can use them if we want to, but it's not dependable enough capacity, and it's expensive. If you went to use them every day, the fuel cost would kill you, basically. So they took our newest and most efficient unit in the plant, decided to put that in a contract with OUC. They subtract all those resources from the load requirement and round that to the nearest whole megawatt, and that's the number of megawatts we pay OUC for every month of the year to be ready to serve that load if necessary.
So if I understand the process, you'll be asked this year for next year's, they'll give you their prepared load forecast and you'll either agree or disagree. So if next year they came back and said it's going to be 175 for the winter, 161, and you thought it should be 170 and 160, will they change it and therefore you'll save money with respect to the demand charges?
Well, see, it's actually happened already because they do this forecast every January, so we already know what the charges are going to be for next year. They have added 7 megawatts to that peak based on history and the economy pick up again, and that's probably about where we're going to be based on the forecast I did for our sales this year too. So I think it's pretty accurate. That's already determined, and it's going to be. We're thinking about that charge on the bill. Starting in January, we'll be paying for 100 megawatts to OUC, and the rate goes up too, so it'll be a double whammy.
So the 93 goes to 100 in 2015?
Yep, let me show you that. Here it is. This is calculation for 2015. Goes to 100. That's so you're probably going to ask me what it's been in the past, and I thought I'd just jot that down because I knew you'd know.
It seems to me that that's a huge jump in the peak from year to year.
Yes, it is.
historically, do you have a 4 or 5% jump in the peak every year?
No, not every year, but on average it's like 1 or 2%. But the years we've had recently have gone up and down. In fact, here's their capacities that under this contract, which started in 2010, started at 95. The next year it was 97. Next year was 105. Back down to 99. Back down to 93. So now it dropped. And back up to 100 for 2015. So it's kind of been up and down. And they've tried. What's happened is they've forecast, a certain amount of growth every year, and if it doesn't happen, they go back and adjust the base down a little bit and reforecast it again.
Well, let's just assume. Let's assume, for discussion purposes, that you set it. You told them to set it at 95, and it actually came in at 95. Then you'd have a 5 megawatt reduction in the demand charges spread out over the 12 months, and you could calculate that cost. The risk is that it comes in at 100. What's the two costs if you underestimate what happens?
Well, if you underestimate the operational cost, is you may get caught with a higher load than OUC is contracted to serve. Now you got to go find some extra megawatts somewhere. And that typically happens when there's no transmission available. So if we don't have firm transmission for the firm resources that we have listed, then we got an emergency. We have to buy some very expensive power.
Well,
we could use 4
Or generate ourselves.
That's what I mean.
You could generate yourself. We can look at that. We can always argue with them and try to bargain them down on the forecast. I guess that's never been approached.
I would like to understand their reasoning in this load forecast that you gave us earlier. They forecasted 173 for 2014.
Mm-hmm.
They forecasted 175 for 2015. Now they're forecasting 180 for 2015. Okay, that I can see maybe that small growth. Why did they revise their forecast from 175 in 2015 to 180?
I suggest we have the planners from OUC come and explain those, because they do them in great detail, supply us that information. And
well, what was our peak in January of 2014?
Thank you, Herb. That was my next question.
We weren't anywhere near that high. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't. Like I said, we haven't hit a winter peak for several years, probably since 2005 was the last time we had over 200 in 2005. Over 200.
Well, that sounds like something we could go back to and complain about.
Isn't there a retrospective audit that for reconciliation of actual versus projection?
No.
No.
You mean in terms of the contract with OEC? No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I understand. I think what you're asking. It would be nice if they did that, but with respect to their estimating function, I think that we could have a retrospective audit. We had to pay for 93 megawatts capacity. I think I understand now how this is calculated, and we've reserved that much power from OUC.
Right.
We have to pay them $1,178,589 a month, every month, in case we need that much power.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Which is about $12.67 in our $12.67 per kilowatt or per thousand.
Yeah, I didn't calculate that.
Yeah,
Well, here it
so-
is right there. I'll put it up on this chart just to give you an idea.
Yeah.
The capacity rate, which is the second column in this last sheet that I gave here,
Well, they send that
is fixed by contract, and it goes up every year until 2018. It stopped escalating.
And the projection from 93 to 100 kilowatts, if my math is right, is what, somewhere around 7.5%?
Right. That's correct.
Which will obviously roll into
Roll into next year. Something
city's
to look
rate
forward to.
structure.
Something to look forward to for next year.
Plus you got that.
plus an increase of about 4% in the capacity rate. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that's the contract that we're under.
Yeah,
And
no,
there's not a lot of flexibility here. We could certainly go back and discuss the load forecast with them.
Well, it seems to me one of the things you could do before you agree each January, February to what their forecast is for the following year is look at whether you could, what the alternative, how much you'd save by reducing the megawatts by, let's say 5 or 4 or 3, and what the cost would be if in fact you had to cover, and see what the trade-off is, because it may be, the trade-off may be that you can save money. I don't know.
Yeah, we can look at that. We just have to be careful that we have our reliable sources of capacity that we can depend on.
Well, we have to find out too if we can even do that contractually. But I'm not sure how locked into this contract we are.
Well, and I can talk with them. They're fairly reasonable on discussion items. So let me see what I can find out and whether they're willing to go back and look at that load forecast again for next year.
I would like, though, I think it would be to have them come and explain to us how they do this forecast.
Yeah, they prepare quite a significant document with a PowerPoint presentation and stuff and send it down, and it ends up in the finance director's office, and sometimes I don't see it, but that's available. They just have come and explain that, and they'll go through the details of how they built the forecast. And
and if they had gone from 175 to 176, 177 next year, okay, that wouldn't maybe raise a question in my mind, but to go, they'd already estimated it's going to go up 2. Now it's going up 7.
Right.
And last year it was 164. So over that 2-year period, that's a huge jump. And then, so I'm curious as to why. Do they know it's going to be cold?
Like I said, I think they're going to say that it was rather normalized, but I don't want to answer for them.
Yeah, there's got to be a reason, hopefully reasonable answer. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to hear what their answer is.
Okay. Let's see if I can set them up for one of your meetings if you'd like.
Okay. Thank you. Now, in the February invoice, how many megawatts did we actually use from OUC?
22,335.
Okay.
That's about
Megawatt
33 an hour, megawatt hour every hour. Average 33 an hour.
Okay.
Well below 93, but then.
And you don't know what we actually did in January?
No, I can get those numbers for you. I don't have them.
Okay.
I'll go back and look at the last several years.
It would be interesting to look at actual versus estimated for at least 2011, 12, and 13.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And do our own little audit of their estimation. In 3 years or 5. I mean, I don't want to be making unreasonable demand, but of your time. I mean, 5 years would be better. We're back to the beginning of the contract, but I'm curious. I'm really curious as to what the rationale is to make that jump from 164 in 13 to 180 in 15.
Okay. I think that's a key question.
Yeah, and see how good they've done in the past.
I have a question that probably is more appropriately addressed to the OUC, but is there a capacity limitation? Can the 100 go to 110 over time, or will there need to be a transmission upgrade somewhere?
If we go over, I think what we have on our transmission contract with FPL is 100 right now. So if we get substantially over that, we'll tell them and we'll see what happens. They ask us every year what we think our loads are going to be and what our resources are going to be. So this coming December, whenever they ask for that, November or December, I'll I'll show them a little bit higher load for 2015. We'll see what happens.
2 Sundays ago, you ran number 4 all day. And how much does that produce, and where did it go?
Sundays?
2 Sundays ago, you ran number 4 all day. I called. The reason I know is that Sunday night I was on my porch and you started blowing off steam, so I called the plant, and they told me they'd run 4 all day. Do you know where that went?
That didn't go anywhere. Actually, they were just a boiler to dry it out, to put it in dry layup. So they didn't really use much gas and it didn't go anywhere.
Okay, so they didn't actually run, they just ran the boiler.
No, they might have said they were running, but they weren't operating a generator. They were just warming the boiler to dry it out, and we put nitrogen on it and leave it.
Okay. But what is the capacity for?
56 megawatts.
It's 56 megawatts, okay. Because we did run it in January.
Yeah,
and
we ran for 24 hours in January and
Right.
sold it to Georgia, someplace in Georgia.
Okay, is there any other questions relative to the capacity requirements presentation? Do we have any questions from the public? Mr. Mutcher.
Mark Mutcher, 617 Indian Lilac Road. This is fascinating. I think it's very useful. That chart up there shows that our capacity charges, which we may or may not use, are 25% of our total purchase power, if you use a $60 million purchase power budget. So it seems like it would be interesting, useful to optimize those estimates if we could somehow reduce what we pay. But we just mentioned the Unit 4. Sounds like Unit 4 is going to be down if we're doing boiler maintenance. Unit 2 and 5 are still down, is that correct?
No, 4 is not down. We're just making it, because it's not run very often, we're drying it out so it doesn't deteriorate so fast.
Oh, okay, but it's capable of running?
Oh, yeah, we can start it in
Okay.
12 hours.
All right. But 2 and 5 are still down, correct? Okay. So, but the reason I'm here and asking about this is that we have 2 and 5. They're giving us credit for 54.5 megawatts for units 2 and 5. I just wonder what the fact that it hasn't run for a while and it isn't going to run for a while, most likely, are they going to come to us and say, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but are they going to come to us and say, well, you really can't count that anymore at some point? You see what I'm saying?
And from what I understand, even if we run 4 to try and peak, it doesn't come off our peak. Is that right? According to the contract? If in January to lower our peak and run 4, it still wouldn't count.
That's correct. The entire calculation here is based on our peak load, not our capacity that we use. To answer Mr. Mitcher's question, we expect the combined cycle with a little bit of good fortune here will be back in operation in May. Our parts are about ready to be returned to Vero that we had rehabilitated, and I talked yesterday with the contractor that did the overhaul work back, and they're willing to come and take it apart and make those repairs, and we'll see what happens. So we're maybe a month or 6 weeks away from having it back in action. And you're right, if we had made no attempt to repair units 5 and 2, they would probably have to come back and say, what are you guys going to do? We can't keep counting this capacity if it's not really going to be there.
I got a question for the city manager. Jim?
I have a question that Tom might help in. And Herb and Robert, I know you were here when the OUC contract was done, and I know they really didn't tell you much about it. But do you have any insight into why 4 isn't part of our capacity.
No, I don't. And they really didn't tell us much at all during the meetings. I wasn't here in June, and I don't know if it was brought to us in June or not. I think it might have been. But, what I hear now doesn't make any sense compared to what we were told back then.
That's not surprising.
What I understood was, in general terms, that OUC could decide which was the most efficient unit of all the units they had. But at the same time, we were given the right to run our units, except for one, I think, to supply our load, or to put it on that line, put it in that list, whether it was cheaper or not. If it wasn't cheaper, then we got whatever delta it was charged. But that, the way I understood it, we were allowed to say, okay, we're going to run it even though it's a little bit more than what you could supply us otherwise.
Which would affect, although as I understand it, and maybe, Tom, this is why I wanted you to stay, that would only affect the energy charge part of our bill.
Correct.
If we
Yes,
ran
that's correct.
4, we would reduce our 22,000 megawatts, say 15 or whatever we would reduce it. That would reduce the energy charge, but the demand charge would be the same.
Right, and the issue you'd have there really is it's an economic issue. We're buying those megawatt hours from OUC for about $43, or we can generate them today for about $60 or $70 with number 4. Which would you rather do?
But is that, because really it only costs us fuel, transportation, and maintenance. Because we're paying $4 million to keep that plant up and running.
Right, we don't pay ourselves a demand
Right.
charge, correct.
So is that $67 from fuel, maintenance, or is that including a certain portion of the $4 million?
That's fuel.
That's
Just
just the
fuel.
heat rate
That's the
conversion.
difference in the efficiency. The 2 things you got to remember about the older units of the plant, they're old. I wouldn't want to depend on them every day to operate.
What do they charge us for
they're
gas?
Very inefficient. Well, we pay basically the market price plus 80 cents for transportation into the contract also. When you get the contract, you'll find that in there. Barry.
So that's only about $5 a therm.
Yeah, and the efficiency of the unit will make that about, no, gas prices right there are about $5. You're looking at about $5.80 delivered to Vero.
Mm-hmm.
And with the heat rate of that unit, it's not even 10,000. It's like 11 or 12,000. So you're looking at over $60 per megawatt hour. That's if it's running perfectly at the top.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way you may want to look at it is if you reduced your capacity from 100 to 95 with the OUC's concurrence, then you'll reduce your annual capacity charges by, I'm just going to hypothetically, let's say $1 million. And then the question is, by using Unit 4, if you needed the energy, will the energy charges for running Unit 4 be less than $1 million? And if they're less than $1 million on an incremental basis, then you're ahead.
Well, the problem is that if we run 4 and cut the peak, it still doesn't cut the peak as far as OUC is concerned. That's the problem.
But my predicate was you tell OUC right at the beginning that for next year we're not going to pay for capacity on 100 megawatts. We're going to pay it for 95, and we'll run the risk that our costs of running 4 to meet any incremental additional peaking load will be less than the reduction in demand charges. And
well, it would be.
Well, then that's something that should be looked at.
The contract seemed to be really screwed up.
Well, I don't know that because I don't know. Haven't read the contract in detail, but I wouldn't know what your rights are each year when they give you their forecast. I mean, if you have the right to say this is what we're willing to live with, and we run the risk, I don't know whether your contract allows that. If it does, then you have to run the numbers.
I think that's where I was headed in terms of trying to direct a question to Jim. Outside of the parameters of the sale and all the discussions and negotiations that have occurred with OUC, over the past 5 years, have there been any discussions with OUC about our rights or discussions about amending the contract that was entered into with the 20-year contract. I suspect not, but I just wanted to confirm that.
There have been discussions. Jan Asperu and myself have talked on several occasions. His position is, Jim, we will sit down and talk to you about the contract. You've got to make us whole. And he repeats that in many of the conversations. But tweaks and adjustments, he said they'd be very happy to sit down and talk to us about that. Coming back, now, we got to remember what our risks are here, just so we put it in perspective. We're talking about the possibility of a brown out in certain areas if you don't have capacity to meet that demand. So I think coming back, somebody asked, how did we get into this contract? This, and I obviously was not here, but thinking like a lot of cities have done in these negotiations, security of lining up capacity in order to make sure you can meet the demands of all your customers at any given time was a philosophy, and it was really dictated by many, many utilities. And that's one of the reasons that many, even the IOUs, build additional capacity, is because they are concerned about capacity demand on their system. We went through in the late 80s, I think it was, where we had the rolling brownouts and all that other stuff. And we heard specifically from our customers. Now, it's been 20 years or maybe 30 years since that occurred, and maybe we could experience that one more time. But that is, in that day and age when people were signing these capacity contracts, it was really to say, I don't care what my load is, I want to make sure that I have the capacity and the power to do that. OUC was very happy to give us that contract to make sure that we could meet that. And so we just need to make sure that we have a little caution, because if we sign a contract and we reduce our capacity and for some reason we hit one of those peak times and the economy is good and all that other good stuff, and there's a short supply or a short supply of transmission at that particular increment of time, and we don't have 12 hours to start Unit 4, there may be some slight reduction in demand from our customers without them actually wanting a slight reduction in demand. So it really is an issue that we need to balance those two things out. And I guess you're buying an insurance policy is what you're doing.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with your assumption that you need to have an adequate reserve margin, and you obviously don't want brownouts. The question is, can you reduce your monthly capacity charge if you think that you can deliver the energy and not take any risks of a brownout at less than and your incremental cost of providing that additional energy is less than the savings that you get from reducing the demand charge. So that all things being equal, if you take no risk and you save $1.2 million one way and it costs you only $500,000 to cover it from your own unit, then you save $700,000.
It's a risk analysis is what it is, and I agree with that. And I think, as Tom says, he can go back to OUC and let's talk about what that peak capacity they are reserving for us and what is the likelihood of us hitting on that. Also, Tom will get a copy of the contract to all of you with OUC so we'll all know what document we're reading from. And it is very interesting read in the fact, for example, your rate per megawatt, I mean, it projects an increase in that charge on an annual basis, and there is no deviation from that. Really the only number to have any discussion about is your capacity that you want them to reserve for you. And that's the real issue.
You were talking about that you wouldn't have 12 hours to start number 4. But we know from our history when those peaks occur, we know what the temperature is, and nowadays, we know 3 days ahead of time when it's going to hit. So we really would be able to start 4 and run it long before a peak ever showed up. And what we did years ago was we just asked people, shut off your pool pump, shut off your hot water heater from this hour to this hour, don't run your washing machine don't do any laundry or your dryer. And it's amazing how much that'll do, and it doesn't really inconvenience the people at all.
Herb, and going back and reading the history of that, because you did that for your CROD in order, when we exited the all requirements, in order to get our peak down to we would have no residual cost after that. But that was a 1-year period. That wasn't a reoccurring control of demand, which does take in. And Bill, I agree with you. There are companies that can come in. The whole theory about smart meters, no matter what conspiracy theory you have, the smart meter issue is really controlling demand. And that meter is going to allow, the city of Leesburg has installed those. Their rates are going up because it's very difficult to recover those costs initially, but long term, that's going to be, and eventually, in my opinion, you will see a demand charge at residential units. And when that occurs, people will self-control their demand charge, just like businesses do today using, you get electric welders. That was always one of our favorite customers because they drove your peak up. But once you really got them to turn those welders on at 2 o'clock in the morning, even though they used more consumption, but they got it out of that peak hour, it really saved them more money and saved us money on the city side as to how they did it. And that's just an equation of your startup time. So there are industries that are like that. In the city of Vero Beach, we are substantially residential with the exception of our business or industries, which happen to be tourism, and they're tourism driven and probably have a lot of the similar profiles to residential, i.e. the hotels and places on the beach. We do have some exceptions to that. We do have a few manufacturing plants, and I think if you went out to most of those, they have a lot of load control factors in place already because we have demand meters on those businesses as we speak.
Jim, while we're discussing this balancing act and evaluating the risk factors and looking potentially at ways to reduce the demand characteristics, what did your counterpart at OUC mean make us whole? I mean, is it simply that whatever the financial terms are of the existing contract are to dictate the financial return to OUC over the life of the contract, even though there may be some agreement on the demand characteristics? It seems to me that we have a contract over the 20-year period where the potential, and why dilute ourselves if this is the case, that the potential for savings is non-existent. I mean, to me, if I made that statement to you and to this city, I expect to be made whole. Take that for what it's worth. I mean, it seems to me that's what either you're intimating or you believe would happen in any subsequent negotiation.
I think there are other variables that could enter into the discussion in order to make the utility whole. Example would be, and we never discussed this is just out of the blue, after this 20 years, they're going to have a need to sell capacity further out into the future. We extend the contract and they give us some credit for that extension of contract. We lock them into, they know where they're going to sell their capacity in the future. We come up with some equation where we can help control their load profile, i.e. running our plants at a particular time that might be able to give them backflow into their system that could help them. And if we used, for example, unit number 4, they may be able to see some benefit back to their native load with us using that. So there are other factors that could come into a discussion in trying to manage this contract. I think the overall game plan to him is that we just have to make our margin up long term under the terms and conditions of the contract. So yes, we could get into those negotiations. I did not think it was appropriate if we're talking about selling the system, to sit down and go through a lot of those issues. But from his perspective, and from all perspectives of major utilities, they don't think what you can do for me in the next 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. They're thinking, what can you do for me over the indefinite period of time. And so and you need to remember also that selling a capacity, Lake Worth being an example, that's becoming the marketplace right now. People go on and do RFPs, and they're buying capacity off of the system, and they're buying it for relatively short periods of time now, because there is a school of thought that capacity and demand will go up. And so therefore, I give you a 5-year contract. In year 6, I think we're going to be able to do a little bit better on you as a customer. And of course, the customer's saying, well, maybe the price will continue to fall. So those type of parts of the equation. But I think we have variables that we could work in. What we're bringing up and discussing today, I think, is very relevant. Can we work with OUC and try to get a capacity need more in line with where we are? And then I need, from my standpoint, and Tom will have to explain this to me, is what is our exposure if we don't meet it? I think we can make up 1 or 2 megawatts from the south, if nothing else. But if we lose out by 10 megawatts on a Christmas Day, then that's not a good plan.
None of us want to do that.
No, or especially on Super Bowl Sunday.
I think
You've got a big TV. It takes a lot of.
I think, first place, I agree totally with what you're saying there, but I think it's time, and you seem to think so too, that for us to negotiate with OUC about how these things are done and what we can do to help. One of the things about running our plant, OUC, I'm sure, is calculating the capacity of our plant in their reserves. Even though they may not be using them, that's part of their reserve if it's not being in use. So therefore, they need, over the whole system, so much reserve, and we're sitting here with a non-used plant, which we could use cheaper, but they can't give it up completely. They can't give up control of it.
That is right. They have an obligation on the statewide network system to make sure that they can feed the loads and that they can dispatch units that are under their control in coordination with units of, for example, Florida Power and Light or Duke Energy or any of the others. And so, that's part of their whole plan, and we are part of that. You're right. That
they may not be able to give it back to us, even though it would be cheaper for us if they could.
And the power pool recognizes that we have a unit 4. I mean, they know that there's that unit that if the world was really going to fall apart, that they know that is available. But I think it would be very, very educational for all of us if we can get maybe OUC to have one of their projection folks come down here and show us how they put these models together. And it's probably a big guess on my part. It's probably some type of computer program that nobody can understand, sort of like Social Security and everything else. But at least they can walk through and give us some of the variables and the rationale. Mr. Chairman, I think that's very reasonable to ask, and hopefully we can work that out and get some dates from them. And
that would be good. And I'd like to have the comparison of actual versus their estimated for the past. And if we just do January, which seems to be the month they base our winter peak on.
I'll look at the winter peaks.
Yeah, just look at, we don't need to look at every month. Just
we have all that data in our statistics. I just don't remember the numbers. So
okay,
it's easy to pull
all right.
out.
So it would be nice to know how good their estimates are before they try to explain to us how they estimate. All right. Anything else for Mr. Richards? Okay. Rob? And the new members, have you all been following the STEP process, the STEP proposal that Rob's here to give us an update on? Okay.
I think Mr. Booms, that might be the only one that.
Okay,
that
so
doesn't know.
give us a quick back up. And give us a
An
quick-
overall or an overview of the step system is about a year and a half ago, as the Indian River Lagoon started to have some issues, there was discussions about getting people off of septic tanks and onto sewers.
Oh.
So we embarked again on looking at possibly putting sewers in on the barrier island, and one of the first and only meeting I had with the homeowners, again, similar to 2007, there wasn't much interest in getting off of septic to sewers.
Because you told them it would be about $20,000
right.
per house.
When you look at the estimates, and part of the reason was the cost. I mean, a homeowner that has a septic system, when you tell him it's going to be $20,000 to connect to sewer, he asks you what I'm going to get out of it. There's really no positive right now. If the septic tank is functioning and he takes a shower, he flushes the commode and it goes away, that's all he's going to get if he goes onto sewer. And so in discussions with the group that was there, two things that I found out. One is if I can become competitive with what it costs to replace a repair a drain field, because they all realize that they're going to have a future cost. They don't last forever. I needed to move towards that type of a cost breakdown. And it wasn't necessarily mandatory that, they knew that they were going to pay something in the future. And at that time, if there was an alternative there that was reasonable, they would be interested. So I started looking at different types of designs. I came up with one that is a little bit different than what you normally would have in a septic tank effluent pump, which is a step system, they call it. In reality, the step system as it exists today is you insert a pump chamber inside an existing septic tank and you just pump the effluent to a wastewater facility. What I came up with was a chamber that exists outside of the septic tank that intercepts the effluent coming out of the septic tank before it goes into the drain field, so that you pump the effluent at that point to the wastewater treatment plant, and now you've removed it from entering into the groundwater. However, what I wanted to make sure that was left in place, because anytime you pump effluent or pump stormwater, you have to rely on power, that when we have hurricanes and we have outages, that the system still works, i.e. the people can still flush the commode and it goes away. So what I came up with in the design was it would overflow into this little pump chamber, but then overflow out of the pump chamber back into the drain field. Now, here's where we hit the roadblocks. When we went to look at permitting it, the Florida statute itself they look at it as either you're on septic system or you're on a sewer system. You don't have both. And since we're connected to both, it became an issue, specifically leaving the drain field in place. They expected the drain field to be abandoned. So we embarked this summer over a campaign to try to get the Florida statute changed. We were doing well all the way up until last week. And it was first presented to the Florida House through Representative Mayfield, and then through the Florida Senate through Senator Altman. Each were assigned 3 committees to review, the normal process where you would go through 3 committees and then to the floor for a vote. It made its way through the House, through all 3 committees, and is sitting there ready for a vote. However, on the Senate side, it made it through the first 2 committees, and when it went from the second committee to the third committee, it was moved there on April 4th. The docket for their April 7th meeting on the Agricultural Committee, which is the last committee it needed to go through, was already set for April 7th. They met on April 7th. They voted on the items that were on the docket. However, they don't meet anymore for the rest of the session. So it's more or less stuck in that session. I found that out last week. I contacted Senator Altman's office, and they have been working diligently, and so has Representative Mayfield's office, to try to find a solution. The first thing that they tried was you can remove it from that committee, request for it to be removed, and then placed on, on the floor to vote. Well, it's left up to two committees at that point. One is the Ag Committee, which they released it. They said, that's fine, we're okay with it. The second is the Rules. And the Rules Committee, is how I understand it, when they look at it, they make up the rules each session. So they're open to things that they're allowed to occur. Their rules that committee or the chairman of that committee has set was, we're not going to allow that this year to be moved. It has to follow the traditional path of going through all three committees. So the last option is to try to find another bill that is out there that they can tag this bill onto that's similar, that is moving through all the committees. So that's what they're trying to do now. We've had some lobbyists that we haven't paid for that have taken this on as something that's a positive that they're trying to help along. One is the Audubon. They've been tracking it. They've been standing up and making comments about the bill as it's moved through all the committees. And the other is the League of Cities. Their lobbyist has also been tracking it. We did contact them last week, and they're trying to help out the best that they can. So at this point, it doesn't look good because we're so far into April. There's only 10 days left. One thing that I will try to do is I have been able to upload all of the emails for all of the senators and all of the House of Representatives within the Lagoon area, and I'm going to add into that the ag and the person or the group that's in charge of the Rules Committee, and I'm going to sit down and write them an email asking them to try to find a solution to the situation that we're in right now, since it is important to the Indian River Lagoon. So.
Your worst case scenario, I guess, would be that you'd have to start over again, that's what.
Yeah, I'd have to start all over. I asked that question. Well, is this sitting in the ag session, and then when they reconvene next year, it just gets heard then? And I was told no, it has to restart all over again. Now, there may be another solution. When I met originally with the problem exists between the Department of Health that regulates septic tanks and the Department of Environmental Protection, which regulates wastewater treatment. And when I met with Department of Environmental Protection, they didn't have any problem. They would write a permit. However, there was still that legal situation that dealt with in the Department of Health. They thought they could work around it. We already had started the bill in process, so we didn't remove it because I could never get in writing from the Department of Environmental Protection whether they could work around it or not. So I figured we'd still let it progress through. And in fact, the Department of Environmental Protection had some issues with the language that we originally proposed because it appeared that it took some of their authority and gave it to the Department of Health. So along the way, I told them, I don't care. Here's the end goal, the goal line that we're trying to get to. However we get there, I really don't care. Whatever language you want to put in, I really don't care. So during this process, the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Health sat down with Representative Mayfield, and they crafted the final language that we have right now. So there still may be a way, since they are in agreement, they're not opposing it, it's just the language is there, and they're trying to find the language that we may get back to that but that process of where we were maybe just get a DEP permit and we'll be able to do the project anyhow. So,
Rob, was there any opposition in any of the subcommittees?
Nope. Every single one of them was passed 6-0, 4-0, 8-0. There wasn't any opposition.
You had a strong platform.
We had a very strong platform for next year. It's just it was a timing issue. Is kind of where we fell into. So we'll try this week to get some emails out and try to see if there's anybody that'll raise their hand and say, hey, I got a solution for you. If not, we'll probably have to wait till next year.
Any thought about doing a little demonstration project anyplace? Could we do that?
Yes, the manager and Monty and I have been talking about over there at the baseball field where the dog park is. There's 2 restrooms that are city restrooms that have experienced issues over the years, and since now they may be used by the dog park and used often, we would have to address the concerns of those drain fields.
Restrooms
so we might retrofit those 2 and get at least that operational and see how we can, as a pilot project for the next year.
They are on Saturday.
Okay.
You haven't asked-
And so, Jim, you're willing to go to jail this law?
See the bad of the chairman of the utility commission.
Well, we can.
I'm sure DEP will write a permit that's a pilot project.
Yeah, I'm up for it. Well, I'll roll those dice. Yeah, that would be good if we could do that little do a little demonstration project, and it would also be good to get that effluent from those restrooms off the riverfront.
Right.
Do you have an estimate on the cost versus the other?
We don't have that yet, but this is also contingent on a grant application, which with FIND, and they have given us some backup that they would like to see this project go through. So we're hoping if we get that grant, then we'll be able to make this work.
Good.
Going back
his
to
grant is for the 2 restroom facilities. We've also applied for a grant for the whole project. It's a third, so it would be about $250,000 grant through St. John's. We've also requested that. So, and the cost from a homeowner standpoint, Bob, is roughly half. So where they normally would spend $15,000 to $20,000, we're looking at about $7,500 roughly. And the best part about the project is it's the cheapest upfront cost for the city. So for roughly about $1 million, I can make sewer available to 1,500 people, versus if you went the conventional gravity sewer route, 80 to 85% of the cost lies with digging up the roads and putting the lines in place. So for the $18 million it would sewer, you're going to spend $12 million or more upfront, up to $15 million upfront, versus less than $1 million. So that was why this step system was the most attractive, really, was that cheap upfront cost to be able to allow people to have that option to get off.
Hey, Rob, back in 2007 you were talking about, and I got a letter here. We got $1.5 million grant. Now, was that going to pay for everything for those people, those first 200, or just to put in the sewers?
Back then, I think estimates on sewer was $12.5 million, so it was more of a seed money. It was $1.5 million the state was going to put up.
Well, this is for the first 200, supposedly.
Right, and then we would do a mandatory assessment and go through the process of then bring 200 more on and bring 200 more on, and there was stipulations on that grant that we had to have over 60% approval.
But
you couldn't even get 20%.
I got the letter here.
Yeah.
But the participants, the homeowners, would still have to have paid quite a bit.
Oh yeah, they would have been paying all of it. That was just seed money to get the program started.
Okay.
That really wasn't. There was no discount to any of the homeowners.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other business to come before us today?
We got an update on the
Are
letter.
we going to do the update on the letter?
I'm sorry. Ms. Brunges called me yesterday and said that she really would not be here today. And she'd hoped she'd have something positive for us next month. But we can certainly do need to talk about can talk about the letter. So, do we have any comments on the letter?
I have a question of the city manager. Jim, when we last had the discussion, and it was a city council meeting, I think both you and the mayor indicated that you felt that the meeting with the Florida Municipal Power Agency was to seek a roadmap. Do you feel, because all I've read is the letter and, of course, the newspaper accounts, that we made any progress in terms of the strategic question of finding roadmap and some achievable next steps?
It's a very difficult roadmap to follow. We've been giving very tight parameters of expectations from the 2 primary parties, and Amy and I talked also about her not coming today because really there's nothing new that we can present just to bring you up to date a little bit, the attorney that we have hired, Chef Wright, he was in conversations with FMPA on Friday. He was in conversations yesterday with FP&L. And hopefully this afternoon he'll be in conversations with OUC, because we also have the issues of the transfer agreements that are going to be part of this whole discussion. And his conversation with FMPA was specifically addressing what is that backstop security issues that are going to be required. We understand FP&L has said that they are not going to pledge the entire interest of their corporation. So they are exploring a couple other options. The conversation yesterday with FP&L was to discuss a couple of those additional options that can sort of shift the burden a little bit and try to get identifiable or quantifiable thing that we're trying to secure here. And when he met with FP&L, he did pass on a lot of his conversation he had with FMPA or Fred, and what some of the expectations, and try to bring those parties together into what can be done. It's a big jump. I mean, it's going to be one of those that it's a major climb to get there. I'm not ready to label it impossible at this point, but it's going to be a challenge.
It's still in play.
Yes, sir. It's still definitely in play. And FMPA has taken a position, and they made their position very clear as to who they want to work with. One of the challenges they had in working with John Igo and Rick Miller is that in FMPA's opinion, they did not have the experience in the regulatory sector of Florida utilities. They are closers, and they are still going to be our closers. John Igo and I talked shortly thereafter, and to try to put it in perspective, we've got to now get instruments that we can get through the regulatory agencies. The Public Service Commission is going to have to approve whatever this backstop is with FP&L that doesn't expose their customers, and so hopefully his experience is going to bring that to the table to make it work. He's worked with all parties. Another strength that Chef Wright has is that he has worked very closely with Florida League of Cities, so he knows the cities very closely. He has had private utilities that he's worked with. He's also been on both sides of either the cities or FP&L. So he's been both on the same side and opposing on the cross of the table from them. So he brings that type of experience to the table. But more importantly, I think he's somebody that all parties will talk to. He's dealt with OUC. So I felt it was very critical that we have somebody that can do that. But I don't want anybody to think that John Igo and the crowd's out, because I think Chef Wright would tell you very clearly he is not a closer. He is a deal maker, and so that's where we are.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Our next meeting would be, Sherry,
It
second.
would be your normal
Second
Tuesday
Tuesday,
meeting.
10
Yes, sir.
a.m.?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Being no other business, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
We'll see you next second Tuesday of the month.